What's going on there? Well, the industry is dying there. You're seeing some kind of atrophy from which it may or may not recover. And I think there are many causes for that.
Nerdrotic.com.
Greetings, you over 1 million practitioners of common sense and the 40% who haven't subscribed yet. Hollywood was once the land of imagination, and now it has become collectively a crime against imagination. Now, if it seems like I make a video like this towards the end of every year over the last few years, you'd be right. I'd love to be in the position to say, hey, Hollywood had a pretty good year, but unfortunately, that's not the case. I don't make the rules, I just make the observations, and without a doubt, the entertainment capital of the world is in a half-decade slump, and now some are starting to come to the realization that this might not get fixed. It has been reported that Tinsel Town has lost nearly a third of everyone working in the industry, which coincidentally matches the amount of ticket sales they've lost over the same amount of time. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying 2025 has been one of the worst years for film in living memory, not counting the year Hollywood took off for COVID. And it'll probably go down as the year of the slop buster. Case in point, at time of recording, the only billion-dollar film is Lilo and Stitch, and the only one that almost made $1 billion was Minecraft, neither of which will go down in the annals of cinema history. Now, there were some surprises, a couple of movies that were bogged down by their budget, so it limited their profitability. One was good, one not so much, F1 and Superman. And some were very profitable, like the sleeper hit of the year, Sinners and Weapons, among others. And most of those successes came from Warner Brothers, who we will get to. But most of the year was filled with flop after flop after flop, and worse, months of nothing, including this past October, which was the worst domestic box office for Hollywood in 27 years without adjusting for inflation. This is a slump that was finally busted by the 9th Predator movie, which has massively overperformed. Its original opening weekend box office estimates were $25 million, and it brought in $40 million, which is great for Disney because they needed a hit, and great for movie theaters. Unfortunately, this doesn't even stop the bleeding. And we'll get to that as well. It's no longer a question that this is the end of Hollywood as we know it. The only question left is, why is Hollywood dying? And the many answers to that one question could be filed under death by 1,000 paper cuts and one massive self-inflicted wound that's starting to fester, which is a shame considering Hollywood has survived a lot over the last century, including but not limited to world wars, pandemics, scandal, recessions, scandal, depressions, strikes, scandals, the Red Scare, where they went after some people who weren't communists and a lot of people who were, the Paramount antitrust case that ended the studio system, forcing the studios to sell the theaters that they owned. And it really was quite the monopoly, because the most movie tickets sold in American history were in 1946, with an estimate 4.067 billion tickets sold, when death stared them right in the face with television, VHS, and DVD. Tinsel Town managed to not only adapt, but thrive. It was in the mid-'80s when Hollywood started making more money from home entertainment than in the theaters, and the profits grew by orders of magnitude, with DVD, where at its peak, that was 60% of Hollywood's revenue. And it was roughly around the DVD era where the runaway production problem in Hollywood started to escalate due to the increase in foreign tax incentives. Both became a thing in the 90s. Something else that was coming down the pike that was developed in that decade that would be the biggest revolution and disruption to Hollywood: the internet. And while Blu-ray was able to offset the sagging DVD sales, physical media peaked in 2007. Coincidentally, the same year Netflix launched its streaming service, and by the mid-2010s, that was the primary way people were consuming their media. Again, coincidentally, with the widespread adoption of smartphones. This is also around the time cord cutting became a thing, costing Hollywood billions. And 2019 was the first year streaming revenue surpassed theatrical revenue to the tune of $48 billion to $42 billion. And in late 2019 and early 2020, one of the most amazing coincidences of all happened. 4 major streaming services were launched right before COVID: Apple TV, Disney Plus, Peacock, and HBO Max. During the government overreaction to a cold, Hollywood was considered by California to be essential. Unfortunately for them, the rest of the population wasn't, and they couldn't go see the movies. But thanks to that horrific government overreaction to a cold, streaming exploded. And shockingly, the bubble burst once people were allowed to go outside. And the only reason theaters didn't collapse is because they were subsidized by the American taxpayer. This was also around the time the Chinese box office started its very sharp decline. And Tinsel Town found out once you break the habit of going to the movies, it's very difficult to get the audience back. So in their infinite wisdom, they decided to shut down their entire industry again. Just when things were starting to ramp up again with the worst time strikes in American industry history. And we're not done with that, but the one thing I have yet to mention is the decline in quality. And while that had been happening for a while due to the previously mentioned 1,000 paper cuts, things were made demonstrably worse in the years 2016 and 17 with the election of President Donald Trump, when Hollywood collectively lost its mind and chose a side against half of the American people and a movement called Me Too. So yes, Hollywood was already in decline for a lot of the reasons I mentioned. I didn't get to them all, and yes, they've always been liberal, but overwhelming TDS combined with the fraud movement Me Too, which had a lot to do with each other, was crossing the line of demarcation into an era that would become the most costly in the industry's history. With Me Too / Time's Up, it was a legitimate movement at first, with Harvey Weinstein, a person that Hollywood celebrated, including Meryl Streep calling him a god, and pretty much everyone in town knowing what he was doing, finally coming to terms with the Hollywood casting couch. Mind you, this is the same industry that would give standing ovations to Roman Polanski and still work with Woody Allen. Now, shockingly, the Me Too Time's Up movement stopped with women and for some reason never really got into what happened to men or children. Anyway, this movement was quickly co-opted into a giant power play. I'll give you just one example. Time's Up board person and Bad Robot co-CEO Katie McGrath, wife to Jar Jar Abrams, forced Kevin Tushihari out as Warner Brothers studio head for the crime of wanting to sleep with an actress so her husband could sign a $250 million deal in 2019, where he's managed to produce exactly one TV show duster that was canceled and an animated woke Batman series that was pawned off to Amazon Prime. Combine all this with the entire industry thinking they need to rise up to fight a boogeyman and form a resistance, turning entertainment into a platform for propaganda, which infected every aspect of the business. The age of masculinity was over and the time of the girl boss had begun. And beloved intellectual properties that had been working for decades were sacrificed on the altar of agenda. Things like Star Trek, Doctor Who, Marvel, Wheel of Time, The Witcher, Lord of the Rings, and The Terminator. And of course, Star Wars, with the worst example of them all, The Acolyte, which was produced and written by Leslie Headland, the former personal assistant to Harvey Weinstein. Traditional male brands that used to be for everyone turned into female brands for absolutely no one and filled to the brim with the message. And when the paying customer started speaking out against this, well, they became the problem. And this brings us to the grievous self-inflicted wound and the one thing most of the media will not discuss at all: making an enemy out of the audience. Turns out alienating half of your potential paying customers is not a good plan. Ricky Gervais tried to warn you 5 years ago.
If you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech, right? You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. So, if you win, right, come up, accept your little award, thank your agent and your God.
A sentiment that was recently echoed by Billy Bob Thornton on Joe Rogan.
There's something about having heroes that are unattainable for you. That way they can stay in that magic spot. So I think we've lost magic and mystery and all these things. First of all, unless you have really studied stuff and really know about a subject fully, who the hell would want to listen to an actor or a musician talk about politics? You know what I mean? It's
right.
like, are we supposed to follow this? I mean, if we are, what if they lead you down the wrong road? If you have $1 billion and you want to save the Badgers, f***ing save them. I mean, you got plenty of money to save the Badgers. Trust me, that's barely going to cut into your budget.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But sometimes miracles do happen now, about 9 years too late. But Jennifer Lawrence, you know, the first female action star.
I remember when I was doing Hunger Games, nobody had ever put a woman in the lead of an action movie.
Yeah, that one. Well, it looks like J-Law might have finally figured it out.
In the first Trump administration, you had a lot to say. I'm curious how you feel about talking out now.
I don't really know if I should. I think the first Trump administration was so wild, and just how can we let this stand? I felt like I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But as we've learned, election after election, celebrities do not make a difference whatsoever on who people vote for. And so then what am I doing? I'm just sharing my opinion on something that's going to just add fuel to a fire that's ripping the country apart. I mean, we are so divided.
Again, A bit late. Okay, a lot late, but I think we need to acknowledge and appreciate that we have a adult pretender who hasn't changed their political side, acknowledging their behavior and how it's affected not only her, the entire industry. An industry that's played its part in dividing the country. An industry that, quite frankly, doesn't have the luxury of losing any customers. An industry that needs about 1,000 more Billy Bob Thorntons and at least a few more Jennifer Lawrences in that moment. And I don't think anyone would say no to more Sydney Sweeneys.
Maybe specifically in this political climate, like, white people shouldn't joke about genetic superiority. Like, that was kind of like the criticism, broadly speaking. And since you are talking about this, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that specifically.
I think that when I have an issue that I want to speak about, people will hear.
And a lot less Mark Ruffalo's, Sean Penn's, Pedro Pascal's, and Stephen Colbert's, whose attitude towards you, the general audience, is to educate the low information pleb.
Why should shows like mine continue to exist? Oh, we're like your friend, who at the end of the day paid attention to the news more than you did. And you're aware of it, you just didn't do the detail work that we did. And then we curate that back to you at the end of the day. But it's really more about how we feel about it, or I as the person who is the vehicle for that.
What?
We're not telling people what to think. We're just trying to show them how.
And the reason Stephen Colbert is getting fired is not because a president doesn't like his views, it's the company he works for doesn't like his lack of viewers. And that's now a concern for his entire region. Tinsel Town is way past the time of shut up and act, because outside of the culture war issues, Hollywood still has a whole set of new problems aside from the ones I have listed in this video coming up. In other words, they're cooked. Let's get back to this year's box office and talk about the latest release at time of recording, the somewhat over-celebrated Predator Badlands. Again, this film massively overperformed. It was estimated to have 25 million domestic over its opening weekend, and it brought in 40 million, which I have to point out is about 1.5 million more than the domestic opening weekend of Alien vs. Predator, which was released in 2004 without adjusting for inflation. And the reason for this overreaction from the access media, the entire industry of Hollywood, Disney, and the theaters is because they're desperate. If AMC theaters alone had to post a nearly $300 million loss during the quarter that had Superman, Weapons, F1, and Jurassic Park, imagine what this quarter is going to be like. And no, Avatar's not going to help because it's released so late in the year. And Disney's Predator, which it doesn't matter if you like it or not. I didn't, a lot of people did, and it probably is going to be a hit. But let's keep in mind, counting streaming, it's the 9th Predator movie in a year filled with remakes, prequels, sequels, interquels, and midquels. Out of the 35 to varying degrees major releases this year, only 5 could be considered, and I'm using air quotes here, original. And it would have been 36, but they decided to move another sequel to next year, Mortal Kombat 2. Another top 5 movies in the world, only 3 come from the States, and only 1 is original. Number 1 is Ninja 2 from China, and number 5 is an anime, Demon Slayer, which beat every superhero movie, including Superman. In other words, storytelling-wise and big-budget film-wise, we haven't seen a lot of innovation lately. As a matter of fact, they've turned creative bankruptcy into a science. And I can't say the term slop, when it's applied to this stuff, is overused because it's so damn applicable. As it stands right now, Warner Brothers had the best domestic box office this year with movies like Minecraft, F1, Superman, Weapons, Sinners, Conjuring 75, whatever it was. And they just got put up for sale. And one of the potential buyers is a smaller studio, Paramount, who just got bought by a production company, Skydance. Admittedly, it's now run by a billionaire Nepo baby, but that will be one more studio gone. We've already lost MGM to Amazon and Fox to Disney. And that particular merger cost Hollywood and the theaters almost 12 films a year. So whoever Warner Brothers is sold to, this will be catastrophic for Hollywood. Now, the Writers Guild of America wants to stop this sale, and there's probably not much they can do about it, and they really have to understand that they're partially responsible for making it happen, thanks to the worst time strikes in history, which were responsible for the loss of 45,000 jobs in the region, contributing to losing 1/3 of the workforce in the region over the last 5 years. Only 1 in 5 TV shows is shot in Hollywood, and individual movie ticket sales have gone down roughly 1/3 in that same amount of time. I think it's a good time to talk about social media, whose rise in relevance coincided with the movie star becoming less relevant. The Writers Guild of America and Film Actors Guild strikes occurred in 2023, the very same year YouTube became the most watched television network. That was also the year the audience became the competition. And that so-called modern audience that Hollywood was willing to sacrifice so much for that never existed because there's only the audience. Turns out they lost a generation and they're about to lose another. But as far as Gen Z is concerned, whose average age is about 20 years old, only 13% say going to movie theaters is their preferred method of watching content. And that's not a surprise considering for a third to a quarter of their life, Hollywood's been shoveling shit at them. And it doesn't help that the gaming industry absolutely dwarfs the entertainment industry. The question now is, can this even be fixed? How does Hollywood get people back in the theaters? Because it is still a vital component to their ecosystem. Some are suggesting make theaters bigger. You mean like IMAX? There's PLMs, 4DX, D-Box, and ScreenX, which looks really cool, but there's one problem. Hollywood would have to regularly release good movies. They would need an Avatar, which isn't a good movie, every month, and that ain't happening. And what's the incentive considering streaming revenue has surpassed the worldwide box office revenue? And I didn't know this until I looked it up. Netflix's revenue in 2024 surpassed the entire worldwide box office alone. And let's be real, this year anyway, the most interesting stuff is happening on streaming, from Mobland to Pluribus, to arguably the best movie of the year, Frankenstein, from Netflix, which only had a limited theatrical release and should have been in 4,000 theaters. Again, can this be fixed? I guess anything is possible. If Tinsel Town can somehow survive the AI revolution, massive layoffs, corporate mergers, creative bankruptcy, runaway production due to their unions, the policy of the city of Los Angeles, and the policy of California, and rediscover innovation in technology without making things more expensive, and storytelling in a corporate risk-averse environment, all while not annoying or pissing off half the country in a second Trump term. Sure, but considering they couldn't shut up about him when he wasn't president, this was the year they nominated a dude for Best Actress, and he almost won if it wasn't for some ex-Twitter posts, and Antifa the movie is probably gonna sweep the Oscars. So I'm guessing no. Listen, there'll always be some form of scripted entertainment and movies in movie theaters, but the days of a centralized Hollywood, well, they are numbered, and they have no one to blame but themselves. And while surprisingly, I'll agree with Matt Walsh's assessment that pop culture peaked in 2008, I don't necessarily think it's dead. It's just changing. To what? I have no idea. And I still believe authenticity is the currency of the future, at least until the robots come along and enslave us all.
Nerdrotic.com.
If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.